confirm that you're still under oath? Say I do.
I do.
Thank you. Advocate Kay.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I'm advised that I was incorrect in calling Mrs. Modise. She's in fact goes by the name of Mrs. Sidibe, and I tender my apologies to her for that. But the reason for mentioning it at this stage is that she would like your leave to ask one more question before I proceed with my cross-examination.
It's not a question, Your Honor, but I think it's for the sake of record. I just want to also remind Dr. Wood that, Conlog was not part of the arms deal, what you call it, package, or never, maybe in short, I would like to say Conlog never benefited from the arms deal. That's all, for the sake of record.
Thanks, Chair. In the BAE-IP's agreement, it lists Conlog as the biggest recipient of a industrial participation initiative.
Ma'am, I suppose you are done, eh? Thank you. Advocate Kay.
Thank you, Chair. Dr. Woods, I represent the Department of Defense. I had understood that one of the main thrust of your evidence yesterday was a point you made, and I took it down. You said that your point is that dubious monies were paid by arms dealers. Now, in relation to that, let me firstly place on record that if any amounts of money were paid in connection with the arms deal that should not have been paid to any individual, the Department of Defense, with you, would also want appropriate action taken against that individual if there were any real evidence of such conduct. But the point where we depart is that you seem to cast the net very widely and taint every aspect of the arms deal, save for one, which I will indicate to you in a moment, with the probability of corruption. And that is the issue I want to debate with you on behalf of the Department of Defense. Let me, as a starting point, just outline that there were 6 items of equipment procured. Presumably you're aware of that. And in fact, save for the maritime helicopters, you actually mention the other 5 items of equipment in your statement, and I'll take you to those passages and I want to traverse them with you. The maritime helicopter, we have evidence before this commission from Admiral Kammerman, was provided by UK Westland, and that is also the company that won the evaluation phase for the best military value. I presume then you have no issue in relation to that item of equipment.
If you could just assist me, the maritime helicopters were those that were bought to go on the frigates, is that correct?
Yes, I'm willing to assist you. They were, and in fact they were acquired about a year after the other equipment.
Thank you, that's helpful. Then I concur.
Good. Then let's begin with the submarines. Now, you will pick that up at on your statement, page 12, paragraph A. Are you there?
Yes, I am. Sorry.
Sorry, Advocate Kane. Which page are you referring to?
Chair, I'm referring to page 12 of Dr. Wood's statement, and towards the top of the page there is a heading A, the submarine deal.
Thank you.
Dr. Woods, have you perhaps read the evidence before this commission presented by Captain Reid or by Admiral Howell?
I'm afraid I haven't, no.
You see, it is to your credit that you immediately agree you haven't read it, because they describe in detail the evaluation process, and what they also dealt with were the issues that were raised in the JIT report, and they gave evidence as to why there were certain changes during the course of the evaluation process, and that the outcome, namely that the GSC submarine won the best military value competition, was entirely in accordance with a fair and proper evaluation process. You cannot dispute that, can you?
Not without reading the documents and evaluating them against other documents which I have.
You see, Dr. Woods, even if you were to do that, you would have no personal knowledge of the facts of which they have testified, would you?
No.
And so when you deal with the submarine deal and you refer to, in fact, I took your words down in relation to paragraph 30, this is what you said. You said the nature of the process is how to achieve a predetermined result. That is, in fact, not a statement that you can, without having considered their evidence and without any personal knowledge of the facts, responsibly make, is it?
Well, just to remind you of my methodology, that I lined up a number of arguments and a number of documents, and it's how they cross-reference to each other, whether it's the red flags on what can happen in procurement deals and how people can predetermine. It was at a stage when I was going to give you examples yesterday when the chairperson ruled that I couldn't do that. Otherwise, I would have been able to show you. So it's not too helpful just to nitpick around little issues concerning one part of my statement. My statement is about an integration of a number of arguments and how they all speak to each other. But of course, I will oblige and entertain as best I can your questions.
Dr. Woods, your thesis is that a whole lot of factors hang together, and hanging as they do together, they would indicate corruption, but that not one single item on its own would be sufficient to sustain corruption. Did I understand you correctly?
If you're understanding that by all the information coming together, it accommodates all the information in all three of the arguments, together with two other documents which I submitted.
I understand then that you're agreeing with me.
I don't believe I've necessarily agreed with you.
Dr. Woods, it's a simple proposition. I need to understand what your evidence is in order to analyze it from the Department of Defense perspective. And in that regard, I'm concentrating on the equipment types, as I've mentioned. And the reason for doing it is because you present arguments pertaining to each equipment type, and then as a whole, you say all of this adds up to create a probability of corruption. Now, if I haven't understood you correctly, would you please indicate in what respect?
You seem to be, but correct me if I'm wrong, only referring to references I made in the second argument. Those have to be interfaced with the nature of established cases of corruption in the arms industry. It has to be interfaced with the document I produced on warning signs and procurement. It has to be interfaced with the types of breakdowns that were in process and why those breakdowns were in many cases serious and what the consequences of them could have been. So you have to look at it all the way across, as opposed to simply the second argument. But if I'm misunderstanding you, then please correct me.
Yes, I think we're making some progress. Essentially, I have indicated I am dealing with the items of equipment because they constitute one vital aspect of a whole argument you've put together. I do understand there are other aspects of the argument, but for my purposes, I need to deal with the aspect that pertains to the equipment. And I need to break it down one by one, and we need to go through it together. Are you with me?
I am.
Coming back then to the submarines, I had put to you that given that Admiral Howell and Captain Reid have given evidence before this commission in which they have explained the issues that were indicated by the JIT report, and they have given evidence that the best product was procured for the Navy in accordance with the policies prescribed by MODAC and DOD Policy 4147, and that they were satisfied that the evaluation report achieved the objective of putting forward the best submarine, which was the GS, the German submarine consortium's submarine. Given all of that, and that you haven't even considered that evidence, surely you have to accept that whatever you've submitted in this statement has not taken into account a very material body of evidence.
You'd be correct, and as far as that the reports that I refer to here have not taken account of that report, that evidence you suggest. If I'd known of that, I would have liked to have seen it, but I'm very cautious because there have been many contradictory opinions, usually very defensive opinions from the side of the department, and which in cases, as I recall, proved not to be very necessarily correct. And I think the JIT report offers you a number of examples of where they were misinformed. And of course, the admirals that you speak to would have to defend the deal the way you say it was established.
Do I understand then that you have a basic skepticism towards any of the DOD witnesses, and you approach the subject matter on the basis that their evidence is not worth taking into account? I'm
not sure the reason for your exaggerated statement. I think one has to look at every evidence critically, every piece of evidence, as I attempted to do on the reports I submitted. And I've again explained that over and over again to see who wrote it, where they got the information from, etc., etc., etc. But they don't necessarily write off just spontaneously anything that the defensive force says or claims. I consider it as well. And if I don't have the expertise, I try and get another opinion.
If you had been aware of the evidence of Captains Reid and Admiral Howell, you would know that the submarine that they recommended was 800 million rand cheaper than the next closest contender, the Italian bid, and that it was clearly best value for money. But you didn't know that, did you?
Well, assuming what you say is factual, or isn't it factual, but I didn't know about what the statement you just made.
And now that you do know about it, is it not the most probable inference to draw that the South African government procured the most appropriate submarine?
I would have to look into it, and as I say, I don't necessarily accept what you're saying is factual. I just can't take your word for granted, as I won't take other people's for granted.
Assume that, and I cannot necessarily say they will, but I don't want to be presumptuous, assume that the Commission will accept the evidence of Captains Reid and Admiral Howell, that in fact the submarines procured were 800 million rand cheaper than the next closest contender, then they would be perfectly entitled to dismiss any probability of corruption. Surely you don't dispute that.
If the Commission were to look at the competing arguments, and I'm sure there'll be more arguments on this issue from future witnesses, and the Commission were to look through the evaluation system and the points scoring and draw the same conclusions that you drew, I would expect them to agree that the best choice was made.
Dr. Woods, let's look at the next item in your statement. It's on the same page, and it comes under a little B headed, the frigate deal. So that's also page 12 of your statement. Are you there? Now, in relation to the frigates, I want to ask you if you have considered at all the evidence of Admiral Kammerman.
There was a time way back in about 2000 where I discussed certain issues.
Which was aborted because the then Minister of Defence, Minister Modise, had decided that a national consensus was required to be achieved and instituted the Defence Review. Were you aware of that?
I do seem to recall reading that somewhere.
You see, that's an aspect where I would have expected you to perhaps have personal knowledge, because you were a member of Parliament and the Defence Review was certainly an issue before Parliament.
That's an unfair statement. It appeared before the two defence committees of which I wasn't party, and there's still some argument about whether Parliament adequately considered or not. But I certainly wasn't a party to it. And I'll be quite honest with you, I have no interest in the military, never have had. So I wouldn't have gone out of my way to see what a Defence Review was about. I wouldn't have understood it.
Then you also would not have understood that subsequent to the Defence Review, the contest for the frigates was reopened and that all the countries, including Germany, in fact all 5 of them that had participated in the pre-defense review round, were invited to again compete in a fresh round of competition. You were not aware of that?
Otherwise, it appears in the GIRT report.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear your answer. May you please repeat it?
Yes, I was aware of that from having read the JRT report.
If you were aware of that, Dr. Woods, then you were also aware that Germany had been a party to the first round prior to the defense review and the second round of competition that began again in about 1997 as part of a number of other countries competing. Were you aware of that or not?
Yes, I was aware.
Now, were you also aware of the fact that Germany had declined to participate in the competition for the frigate prior to the April 1994 elections?
I can't recall having been aware of that.
Let me ask you one other thing. Were you aware that the predetermined evaluation process, consisting of a military evaluation, a nip and dip evaluation, and a finance evaluation, resulted in the German frigate consortium winning the evaluation? Were you aware of that?
Winning the overall, becoming the preferred bidder, is that what you're referring to?
It became the preferred bidder at a later stage as a result of a cabinet recommendation, but much earlier on, in the initial stages of evaluation according to predetermined processes, the German frigate consortium came out as the first contender. Were you aware of that?
I seem to recall that being in the sequence of events and referred to as such in the JRT report. But I also seem to remember it being very disputed as well.
When you refer to the disputes, you haven't yourself looked into the evidence of any of the witnesses with first-hand knowledge who participated in that evaluation process, have you?
As you're well aware, I've explained my methodology over and over and over again.
Yes, your methodology is to rely on press reports that indicate what you are, that support your thesis, and to avoid evidence which does not support your thesis.
I disagree with your accusation.
Dr. Woods, how else do you explain the fact that you are prepared to come before this commission and make allegations relating to these items of equipment that would indicate that there was a probability they were tainted by corruption, yet you have not even considered the evidence of the witnesses who had personal knowledge of these processes?
I once chaired a very extended SCOPA committee and had a lot of evidence firsthand from the witnesses, including Mr. Carman. I took their submissions very seriously, as I did other parties. And so I think your statement once again is flawed.
May I understand that? Are you saying that you chaired SCOPA and that in fact you gave Admiral Kammerman the opportunity to appear before you and deal with the issues raised in relation to the arms deal?
We had many representatives from the military and its 3 arms and arms corps at a very big hearing, which received a large amount of press coverage, and we asked a number of questions across wide-ranging issues concerning the arms deal. That was in the year 2000. I cannot anticipate every question one might get on occasion like this. So I can't recall exactly what Mr. Kommerman said at the time or not. But I did meet with Mr. Kommerman. In fact, when I called for a lot of confidential documents, they were delivered to my office by Mr. Kommerman personally, who flew down from Pretoria with them, and I remember on that occasion chatting. So I have tried to listen to all sides, but I am agreeing with you that there could be other things that he could have said that would have enlightened me.
Dr. Woods, my instructions from Admiral Kommerman is that you are correct that he delivered a large mass of DoD documents to Scopa whilst you were the chairman, and much of which he delivered himself. But he says that you haven't taken them into account in your statement. There's no evidence you've read them. And he also says that you refused to see anyone from the Department of the Defense in relation to the allegations.
I disagree with that last statement. At that time, we couldn't get enough of people within the department to help clarify issues around the concerns that were brought to our attention by the Auditor General concerning the arms deal.
In paragraphs 33 and 38 of your statement, you're dealing with, I presume, the issue of the combat suite. And you refer to Thompson, Shabir Sheikh, FBS, ADS connections. In both paragraphs, you mention FBS. What is FBS?
Yeah, I think that could be a small error. There was often confusion about ADS and FBS, who had largely the same directors, and they had a connection. I think, if I'm correct, Mr. Shabir Sheikh headed up both of them once upon a time. And the allegation of Augusta paying a certain amount for submarines, I think, if I recall correctly, was alleged to have gone through FBS. But I can't recall the detail, forgive me.
No, the difficulty is, of course, in the absence of you being able to explain your own statement. It's very difficult for me to deal with it, but we'll take it up, hopefully, with somebody who has personal knowledge of these issues. But let's go to the substance of the paragraphs dealing with the combat suite. Were you aware of the fact that ADS was the only company in South Africa that was able to supply the combat suite for the frigates?
It's not what I'd been made aware of. And just to go back to your previous question, if you want to know what FBS stands for, I think it's Futuristic Business Systems.
Yes, thank you. Let's just progress to the answer you've just given, which is that it was, I thought you said it's not what you had been led to believe. In other words, we're dealing with ADS being the only South African company able to provide the combat suite?
Yes, you want me to repeat my response? That information I recall from way back when you suggested otherwise. So I'm not aware that what you say is true or not.
Well, Dr. Wood, if you had read the statement of Admiral Kammerman or heard his evidence, or even considered the documents he provided to you, you would know that Young himself has recognized this. And I'll read what Dr. Young says in this regard. In his note of 5 August 1999, he states that although ADS is a South African registered company, it is now foreign owned. However, we recognize that there is no other single company with the requisite experience to take its place. What then gives you the ability to question the award of the subcontract for the combat suite to ADS as being possibly tainted by corruption?
You know, once again, assuming that your Mr. Kammerman is correct in what he says, I've made no reference to Mr. Young, so I would ask you to be careful with just drawing assumptions. And thirdly, I'm referring to a press report which is GGW 21. If you read and see what it says in reference to my paragraph, you'll see how far I will go on this matter.
Now, I mentioned Dr. Young's statement in that regard precisely because he competed for the combat suite and alleged that the award to ADS was tainted by corruption. And so for him to have made that concession makes it even more outrageous for you to contend the contrary. But let's progress then on this issue of subcontracts and GGW 21. Tell me, are you complaining about the award of the local subsystems or the foreign subsystems?
Or foreign or local subsystems is really irrelevant to the way and the method I'm using across a number of arguments to propose that there's a probability of corruption.
You see, Dr. Woods, it really isn't that simple or fair of you to simply brush everything with the taint of corruption. There are a number of different subsystems, some of which were local and some of which were foreign, and they were awarded to different contractors as a result of a competitive bidding process. But you can't even tell me where you make your issue. You can't even say there's a particular subsystem which I suspect was tainted by corruption. You just say it doesn't matter.
You know, I never said it doesn't matter in such a general sense. I said that point, I believe, is not relevant to the big picture that has been constructed through the many references I make, secondary source references mostly, and to my analysis thereof.
You see, then that leaves the Commission with this thesis from you. which is that if you can paint the brush widely enough, there's no need to dig down into the detail and even be specific about your allegations. You just leave this general sense that everything is somehow tainted. Is that what you intend to convey?
I don't believe I'm as immoral as that. What I intend to do here, in the short time that the Commission gave me to do it, having come from a basis of not having looked at a single arms deal document for many, many years, is to be helpful to the Commission and suggest that that this statement of mine and the way I have analyzed it would perhaps give some direction to the investigation that needs to take place to see whether the probabilities I refer to do in fact have grounds or not.
You see, Dr. Woods, if you had couched your statement as just a pointer to indicate areas of concern, it would have been quite a different statement from the one you actually signed. For instance, in paragraph 13 of your statement, the last sentence, you say that the denial of any possibilities of corruption in the SDPs by the former members of the executive who have appeared before this commission is incomprehensible. Now, that's quite a strong statement from somebody who hasn't kept track of the evidence or up to date with the investigation.
You know, I think you're being a little disingenuous and perhaps also illogical. The point which I'm clearly making here is that in the face of what can happen in big procurement deals, and the bigger the deals, the higher the risk, and more especially big deals within the military for a number of reasons that pertain to the military, that to me it was incomprehensible that the members of the executive that I refer to could have simply dismissed there being any possibility of any form or any degree of corruption. That it remains incomprehensible, as it does to a lot of other intelligent people.
Yes, well, they spoke from personal knowledge, and they had no knowledge of corruption, and you yourself have accepted that the majority of the cabinet, including the witnesses before the commission, were not men who enriched themselves through this arms deal. And so it is not at all incomprehensible. They are speaking from personal knowledge. Let me carry on and go to the next item of equipment, which pertains to the Hawks. Now, at page 14 of your statement, against the letter C, you deal with the BAE deal, and what you capture thereunder seems to me to pertain to the acquisition of the Hawks. In regard to the Hawks, I presume that based on the answers you've already given, you have not considered the evidence given by former Deputy Minister of Defence, Mr. Casrals.
No, in my experience of Mr. Casrals' utterances would make me very cautious of taking his word at face value.
Now, in relation to...
Just hold on, Advocate Kane. Dr. Wood, can you just answer the question? Have you considered that statement or not?
No.
Thank you.
You see, Dr. Woods, not having considered the evidence, it really doesn't lie within your domain to argue for a credibility finding against Mr. Casrals. Surely you do accept my word of caution in that regard.
I agree that the more evidence you can consider and incorporate into the arguments you produce, and this applies to you as well, the better.
Now, just before the lunch adjournment, you transgressed into a discussion about the price of the hawks as compared to the price of the hawks procured by the Australians, and you suggested that the Australians had paid a lot less than South Africa, and I presume you intended that to be another reason from which we should infer corruption.
Those are your words. You can assume that if you so wish, but I didn't say that.
Well, let's just take a step back and test what we're dealing with here. You would accept, I'm sure, that a comparison of two different militaries' equipment is very difficult because they generally do not share all the information pertaining to the specifications and the logistic support. You'd accept that, surely?
I would accept that, but on the other hand, I was very surprised in my consultations with senior officials from Airmachi and from the Czech bid as to, don't ask me how, but how much information they all had of each other's rivals and deals and specifications and pricings. And so once again, I have been quite open as to where I saw the information from and how that formed the basis of certain assumptions.
And I lay that foundation actually against myself because the information I have is at best superficial, and I do not have that very detailed comparison. But the information I have, Dr. Woods, is that South Africa paid 3,873 million for 24 hawks. The Australians paid 5,780 million rand for 33 hawks. And by just doing the very rudimentary exercise of dividing the South African rand amount by 24 and the Australian price by 33, one comes out with a comparison that indicates that in fact South Africa paid 161 million rand per hawk and Australia paid 175 million rand per hawk. Those are my instructions. Do you have any reason to dispute that that is accurate?
I would need to see the details. If you were in our case of how the many components that went onto the basic price, I'm sure the same applied in the Australian deal. One would have to compare apples with apples. But it appears that the information I've received differs to that you have at your disposal. Which is right? Perhaps yours is, perhaps mine is.
Yes, and the important point is that to compare apples with apples would take quite a detailed exercise, and you would have to be assured of receiving full information. You agree?
In the case, if I were to say we paid grossly too much for the hawks, which has been suggested from a number of quarters, then I would need to base that on a fairly detailed assessment, especially if I was saying I'm coming to that conclusion when comparing it to the Australian deal. But if you go back to my earlier statement, the point you're making is not the point I was making when I made it just before tea.
You're correct. It was not a point in your statement. It was something you said before lunch. And I just want to check then that you are not actually alleging, because you have not done sufficient work to enable you to allege it, that South Africa paid far more for its hawks than any other air force.
Yes, there's no doubt that, as with many of these issues, as we proved earlier on today, that I've been quite open about where I get my information from, why I consider that information. That I have a lot more information I could have incorporated, but didn't have time. We also had the unfortunate incident, as my evidence leaders will tell you, where a lot of my documents somehow misplaced a few days before this hearing, and it was quite a desperate rush to try and find copies, to try and re-establish them. But I'm sorry, I'm sort of leaving your question behind. Could you just repeat it, sorry?
Dr. Woods, what I had said to you is, based on your evidence before lunch, it was not an issue in your statement. You're correct on that. You are not saying, because you haven't done the necessary analysis to enable you to responsibly say it, that South Africa overpaid or paid more for its hawks than other countries paid for theirs, are you?
I'm saying on the information that I do have, that would appear to be the case. But I accept there could be more information. And I think with many of the statements you're making, I wish I could ask you some questions, because it appears that you are being very selective yourself.
Dr. Woods, if you are still...
Just hold on. Dr. Woods, you can't ask counsel questions. Counsel is here to ask you questions, and you must answer counsel's questions. It doesn't work the other way around.
I apologize, Chair. I withdraw my question.
Thank you.
Dr. Woods, I was only interested in the first part of your answer, not the second, which the chairman took up. I was interested in the first part of your answer, in which you said you were in fact making the allegation that South Africa overpaid or paid more than other countries. Now, would you then detail the exercise that you have undertaken in order to enable you to responsibly make such an allegation?
Well, if I could have anticipated this question, I would have brought documentation from me, which comes within the international military establishment, which suggested that to be the case. I've also referred to the information I was able to obtain regarding the Australian deal, and so on those indirect sources, I make a point, but I still don't recall, but I'm open to be corrected, that I'm making the statement you're attributing to me. It's certainly not made in my statement, but maybe it was made verbally in answer to a question where you claim that I said we overpaid for the hawks. I just want to make sure that I did in fact say that.
Dr. Woods, it's not really a memory test, and I'm not trying to catch you out. I actually want to understand what you are saying so that I can deal with it. I can only deal with what you are saying and what evidence you've brought to this commission. So let's just be absolutely straight with one another. Are you saying that South Africa overpaid, or are you not?
I'm saying I've noted arguments and opinions which suggest that to be the case. But as I said, if we did overpay, then I would have to start saying there's something fishy there. But as I made a point all the way along, I've made no accusations of corruption. I'm working towards trying to present the Commission with a body of information that suggests there's sufficient reason to believe there's probability, so that they, in terms of their brief and the obligation to conduct an inquiry, can take these issues forward where they believe there's merit.
Well, what you do say, have a look at paragraph 83 of your statement, look at the last sentence of it, and there you conclude that the evidence presented to substantiate this situation, and you're talking about what is improper in the procurement, is almost irrefutable. That's a strong statement, Dr. Woods. It goes well beyond what you now suggest, which is just have a look at these areas that have caused me a little bit of concern, It's much stronger than that, is it not?
Well, if you wanted to, rubbish the Auditor General's briefing on this point, if you wanted to rubbish everything in the JRT forensic work, if you wanted to rubbish the testimony of Lieutenant General Pierre Steyn, then you could challenge me, because I'm referring here to the management control and executive oversight of the procurement process, and it's supplied a lot of fairly strong evidence. And I believe that evidence substantiates the situation and is almost irrefutable. So it's a strong statement, but just get on track as to where it comes from.
All right, we'll return to that theme, but I suggest to you that you have made serious allegations in your statement that go well beyond simply indicating where corruption could be and needs to be investigated, and that's why I'm going through it in the detail I am. Let's have a look at the issue of the non-costed option of acquiring the Hawk. We're still dealing with the Hawk. Now, in that regard, were you aware that the cockpit fitted in the Hawk was designed to emulate that of the Gripen?
Yes, I was.
And were you aware that that enabled the training of fighter pilots in a 3-tier system in the best way possible?
I recall the proposal for the 3-tier system, which I think was later changed to 2, wasn't it?
You can take it from me that the evidence has been categorical from a number of witnesses, including General Bain and a number of others, that in fact we changed for a short period to a 2-tier system and back to the 3-tier system prior to the acquisition of the Hawks and the Gripen. And so what we were facing was a 3-tier system. Were you aware of that?
Yeah, my memory fails me. I don't know. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Now, in relation to the Hawk, one of the other major attractions to it was that it was actually capable of engaging in combat, not merely training pilots. Were you aware of that?
Yeah, I recall reading that somewhere, yes.
And so when the former President Mbeki and former Deputy Minister of Defence, Minister Casrils, gave their evidence with reference to written recordals of their reasons for acquiring the Hawks, which included some of those I have given to you, you surely don't suggest that they are lying and misleading this Commission as to the true reason for making the decision to acquire the Hawks?
Yeah, the first reasons given by the Minister, Department of Trade and Industry, were the reason for the superior offset deals that British BAE offered on the Hawks. When he was challenged on that, his reasons were later changed to say that it was the migration from the Hawks as a trainer aircraft to the Gripen as a fighter aircraft made sense as opposed to the Air Machi to the Gripen. Of course, in the JET report, there are three opinions that the forensic guys got that contest that view. The view of Air Machi itself, who showed in some detail that the migration from the Air Machi to the Gripen was far smaller than the migration from the then impalas to the cheetahs. So one gets all these contesting views, and I appreciate where you're coming from and where your view comes from. I have to look at it more widely.
In getting the contesting views, surely one defers to the view of the person entrusted to make the decision at the time, and surely if that is made on a rational basis, one would be irresponsible to then cry corruption.
Well, I don't know who's crying corruption. I certainly am not. But you have a tendency to rely on officials within the DOD, the wider DOD, and ask me to respond to their opinions as if they are gospel fact. I can't do that.
Dr. Woods, I accept that you can't do what you have just described, but it's not what I am seeking to do at all. I'm presenting to you a summary of the evidence which I submit you should have read, emanating from the former president and former deputy minister, backed up by minutes from ministerial committees in which they describe the reasons for acquiring the hawk. And I'm saying to you that you can't possibly suggest from your vantage point that their reasons were irrational or so irrational as to indicate corruption, can you?
I couldn't and I wouldn't.
The next item in your statement is page 15, D, the Augusta deal. So we're now dealing with the light utility helicopters. And it in fact means that we have progressed nicely through the list of equipment. Now in that regard, General Viljoen gave evidence, and his evidence was that there was no tampering with the evaluation process or the value system, and that the Augusta was the type of equipment that won the best military value. You can't contest that, can you?
No, I can't, but once again I have to take into account opposing views, and in this regard I'm very hopeful that the chairperson succeeds in getting Messrs. Holden and Van Vuren before this commission, because one of the strongest contesting views is in their book, The Devil's in the Detail.
Yes, and if you had read the evidence, you would know that the various officials with personal knowledge have been confronted with the allegations in Van Holden and Van Vuren's book, and they have dealt with those allegations. But you're not aware of that, are you?
Well, from your vantage point, it would appear in every case that your officials have dealt with the situation and given honest answers. I don't necessarily accept that.
Now, the other interesting aspect of some of the answers you've given is that you rely on, it seems, meetings that you've had with losers, people who lost out on the tender process. And so, for instance, you referred to the Aeromacchi, the Italians, when I was dealing with the Hawks, and now you seem to rely on evidence of Bell, who lost out in the contest with Augusta. So do you not see that you are relying on the say-so of people who are the losers in a tender process?
Yes, I am, and I'm very supportive of the point you're making. As happens in any number of procurement deals, losers are often aggrieved where they're not justified to be so. Hopefully I do try to take that into account.
Thank you. Then the sixth item of equipment doesn't appear in the same order in your statement. It is the Alpha, or the Gripens, the Advanced Light Fighter Aircraft. Now, in that regard, the evidence before the Commission has been that the Grippens won the contest for the best military value. In other words, they satisfied all the military's technical specifications and were the most economically priced. In those circumstances, one would not generally look for a probability or occasion of corruption because South Africa procured the best priced equipment. Do you differ with me?
No, I share that understanding. I think from what I recall of going through in detail of the evaluation and selection process, that the Gripen was most likely a deserved winner.
Then if I may ask you to turn to page 21 of your statement where you deal with General Pierre Stein's evidence. And may I ask the same question again? There may be a different answer to this one since you have quoted from him, but have you read his statement and his evidence before this commission?
I haven't read the full statement, no.
Where did you actually procure these quotations that are set out at page 21 and 22 of your statement?
I can't recall exactly. I would imagine I got them from the Commission's website.
The Commission published a summary of his evidence to forewarn people prior to him, or a summary of his statement, I should say, to forewarn those who may have an interest in his evidence prior to him giving his evidence. Do you think you perhaps obtained these quotations from there?
I could be incorrect, but I begin to think I might have got the statement from my evidence leaders. They will correct me if I'm incorrect.
All right. I do recognize, in fairness to you, some of these quotations as being taken from his statement, but I couldn't find all of them, which is the reason for my questioning. I couldn't locate the source of all of them in General Stein's statement. But be that as it may, then let me go back to my first question. Have you read that statement, or do you not recall?
I read the statement that was given to me, but I suspect it wasn't the full statement.
Now, when you rely on General Stein, I understand it to be one of the pillars of your overall thesis that there was corruption in the arms deal. Is my understanding perhaps too superficial?
Actually, my thesis doesn't conclude that there was corruption in the arms deal. May I correct you just once again on that? No, Pierre Stein's, the references that I include here, and which I elaborated on yesterday, are just another source which tends to agree with the JRT's observations and the earlier Auditor General's observations that the processes were weak to the point that all sorts of opportunities for any number of irregularities and even corruption were possible. I do suggest that the third of the three references I make, this is the one to Lieutenant General Pierre Stein, does carry some authority. He was the Secretary for Defense. He was present. I also mentioned yesterday that I interviewed him way back then, made my own notes, so I was aware of a number of these observations that he had made. I also referred you to an interview that was conducted with him by the JAT forensic people, which was in the first draft, but which was mysteriously absent from the final draft of the JIT report, bar 2 sentences.
Dr. Woods, that was a long answer, but let's come back to the question. You have not read the evidence of Mr. Steyn in this commission, and neither did you read his cross-examination or the documents upon which he relied and in relation to which he was cross-examined. That's the current state of play, am I right?
Well, firstly, if the document I did receive is not the full testimony, then you would be correct on the first point. But you're certainly correct on the second point. I never saw any supporting documentation that you refer to.
And you haven't read the transcript in which his oral evidence was given and he was cross-examined before this commission, have you?
You're correct.
You see, because it is really, I submit, irresponsible of you to have as one of the pillars of your thesis of corruption the evidence of a person when you have not read their testimony and you have simply opportunistically extracted snippets from what seems to be a summary of a statement.
For the umpteenth time, it's not a thesis on corruption. I think you really need to get that straight. Secondly, your words are calling this a pillar. I don't refer to it as a pillar. I don't present it as a pillar. So I don't know why you're using that exaggerated word for what effect. Thirdly, you say I extracted nothing. I was given a document. This is the document.
Dr. Woods, let's have a look at your own words in paragraph 66 at page 26 of your statement. In the last sentence of that paragraph, you say the following: in the case of the SDP exercise, the PwC and Lieutenant General Steyn have clearly destroyed the illusion of compliance which government presented. Now, that I submit to you, in the absence of having considered his evidence, is in fact an irresponsible statement.
Well, I disagree with you, and I believe I have an expertise in this field which you don't have.
Now, if you would please indicate to me in what respect it is that General Steyn's evidence would indicate that there was merely an illusion of compliance and would assist you in drawing your conclusion that this was a farce, contrived, predetermined decisions were being made, and it was an appalling exercise in deceit. Those are your allegations. What does General Steyn say that makes you believe that to be the case?
To unravel your manipulations of my words. And you made a number of points. I hope I can recall them all. To single out Lieutenant General Steyn's reference here is disingenuous. I put it together in a package with the SDP exercise and the PwC forensic exercise. And I say those together. Maybe Pierre Steyn and my assessment was a relatively minor part. As hard as you try to elevate it, is to the only part. And it destroys the illusion of compliance, because as we mentioned earlier on, the ministers insisted that there was total compliance, that the deal and the processes and the structures and the practices were perfect. There was no chance of anything going wrong. And that's on record from the ministers. You then jump to the first paragraph of 66, where I'm not talking necessarily about the arms deal. I'm talking generally about something that continually happens and which the Auditor General often refers to and which we all witness in our own way when we see exposés come, that it appeared that in a big procurement deal all the boxes were ticked. But we learn how devious people can be in giving that illusion of compliance where in the end there wasn't compliance and where corruption took place or big mistakes happened. Now, I can give you any number of examples on that, as can the Auditor General. But if you don't agree, that's your right.
Dr. Woods, I want to bring you back to the question, and I apologize if the question was too long. Let me make it a lot simpler. We're dealing with General Steyn, and he is employed in your statement as part of the reasons, you would say, or indications of corruption. And my question was, what in particular does General Steyn alert you to that causes this concern?
Repeat your question, but this time to leave out the words that this is alluding to corruption. It's not. It's alluding to the failure and weaknesses of systems. Could you just get that straight, and then maybe we can make some progress?
That's a helpful answer, thank you. So General Steyn's position and authority is not being used to indicate corruption. It's being used to indicate merely a breakdown in process, you say.
Read my statement, please.
Just so, Dr. Woods, the question is simple. Please answer the question. It's simple and straightforward.
It's in my statement.
Dr. Woods, a proposition was made to you. Is that correct or is that not correct?
Well, I've made the point a few moments ago, which suggested it wasn't correct. I've said as much, but maybe
Thank you.
Maybe I need to
That's
refer
all that
it
I
another
wanted
way.
That's all that I wanted to understand. So you say the proposition is not correct. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What is in your statement, Dr. Woods, is paragraph 61, which appears immediately below the heading dealing with Pierre Steyn. Let me read it to you. The above evidence of the SDP procurement exercise having been open to manipulation is indisputable. This is, however, further reinforced by the testimony of the former Defence Secretary to the Commission. So what I understand you are saying is that it merely indicates a breakdown of process, and we're not dealing with a corrupt manipulation. Is my understanding correct?
Sorry, you're a bit too quick for me there. I missed the paragraph you're referring to, so I was unable to follow you.
If you would turn to paragraph 61, are you there now?
Thank you.
Now, you indicated to me that you were merely indicating a breakdown of process. I wrote down your words, and not a corrupt manipulation. And so when I read paragraph 61, that is all I must understand by your words.
Absolutely, but you were earlier referring to, and you were speaking to paragraph 66, and you were quoting from there. But the same point I made there applies to 62 as well.
Then I know what we're dealing with. Now, the evidence of General Steyn pertained mostly to his unhappiness in a few aspects, pertaining to minute keeping, which we dealt with, pertaining to the acquisition of the Hawks because they were more expensive than the Aeromachi, which was traversed before this commission. But there was a very important part of his evidence. He made it clear that he did not make any allegation that Mr. Medici was in favor of any particular contractor or product, such as the Hawk. Were you aware of that?
I wasn't aware he made such a statement, but I have no reason to doubt it.
And he went further and denied that there was no impression that he had that any member of the procurement team was in favor of any particular contractor. He said he had no such impression. Were you aware of that?
I'm not aware of him making that statement, no.
Just for the record, Mr. Chair, it appears at transcript page 6753, lines 8 to 15. Certainly. The transcript I'm referring to is transcript page 6753, lines 8 to 15. Dr. Woods, Mr. Esterhazy made a similar statement. He was asked, and I quote, "Do you have any impression that Minister Medici had any type of informal or behind-the-scenes relationship with any other UK equipment manufacturer?" And his answer was, "I have no indication of such a relationship." You weren't aware of that, were you?
I wasn't aware that that statement was made. But what I can say, but Chair, it would amount to hearsay, but in my interview of Mr. Steyn, he did tell me that there was a friendship between the late Minister Medici and senior executives of BAE. He never made any accusations, but he did suggest there was a friendship, and told me that at times, I think the Air Force had to fly Mr. Medici over to the UK just to meet with his friends there.
Sorry, Dr. Woods, I perhaps didn't hear you correctly. Who gave you this information?
Lieutenant General Pierre Steyn.
Yes, well, it's not his evidence under oath. Would you please turn to page 29 of your statement? It is the page upon which you have your diagram of the process for selecting equipment, starting with the evaluation stage and ending with the cabinet. Are you there?
I am, thank you.
May I ask you, do you have any personal knowledge of General Nyanda's position or role?
If I recall, he became head of the Defence Force. Am I correct?
Yes, he became chief of the Defence Force. Do you have any personal knowledge of his role in the acquisition process?
No, I don't. And strangely, his name has never really featured much in the large volume of material that I have.
My instructions are that he played no role in the acquisition process other than to sit as a member of the AAC. You dispute that?
No, I don't.
Let us do the same exercise in regard to Mr. Chippy Sheikh. What is your personal knowledge, if any, of his role in the acquisition process?
Again, my sources are secondary. I would refer there's numerous references in the forensic work by PricewaterhouseCoopers. But from numerous minutes of various meetings, whether they're from SOFCOM, were they from combined meetings between the AAC and AASB, from the Cabinet Subcommittee where Chippy Sheikh used to do the minutes. I gathered a lot of information which gave me a lot of insights into his role.
Dr. Woods, do you know what position he held?
I'm not sure of the exact, but it's head of acquisitions, words to that effect.
Yes, he was the chief of acquisitions. Would it not therefore be entirely right and proper as the chief of acquisitions to be heavily involved in the acquisition process?
In terms of international best practice, that would not be advisable.
You suggest that you should not have a person with the responsibility of being chief of acquisition.
That's a silly statement, but the point being here that in numerous documented cases of corruption in procurement, one has to always be guarded of decisions actually being made at the bottom and then sold upwards. And for that reason, you have divisions of responsibility, which serves as checks and balances. For one person to having had some involvement at the valuation stage, to chair SOFCOM most of the time because Mr. Esterhuizen often wasn't there, and then to be doing the presentations from PowerPoint presentations all the way up, including into cabinet, places an individual into a very, very strong position. So I'm not accusing Mr. Chippy Sheikh of being corrupt, but I'm just saying in the section of this statement which precedes this diagram, that this is just an illustration of how, was the word careless? I'm not sure. Everybody was regarding having best practices in place and best procedures in place, and keeping the divisions the way they are, because those were established internationally for very, very good reason and were established through very, very hard experience.
May I outline a set of facts to you? I want you to assume them to be correct. So I'm painting a scenario. The scenario is that Mr. Chippy Sheikh had no role in the bottom evaluation phase in your diagram. So the foot of the diagram, the evidence there is people with first-hand knowledge of the process described that he had no influence or role in that process at all. The scenario I then paint is that he coordinated the results from the evaluation phase, and the evidence is that those results that he coordinated as chair of SOFCOM matched the results from the evaluation teams and did not change at any point in the chain upwards. If that were the truth in the scenario and the evidence that were to be accepted by this commission, would you then accept that Mr. Sheikh's role as chief of acquisition was not an improper influence over the process?
Now, even if that was correct, I would still say in terms of universally accepted best practice, it wouldn't be a good thing. It would be considered improper. But I could just refer you on the first point you made to the JRT report, where they indicate that Chippy Sheikh did intervene in nip and dip evaluations and in fact imposed evaluation methods from SOFCOM which took the place of the original evaluation methods. Whether you're correct or the forensic guys are correct, I'm open to learn.
Yes, well, the evidence has been that Mr. Chippy Sheikh did not intervene in this evaluation phase, and there was no manipulation of the results to which you've referred, Dr. Woods. what is it then that you find objectionable, given my scenario, in relation to Mr. Chippy Sheikh's role? Would you be specific?
The only thing I find objectionable is that best practices weren't applied. And as best practices, which I do describe somewhere in my report, are the collective experience of many, many countries who've established what the rules should be, what the practices should be, and these have been established for very, very good reason. And when we depart from that, as the Auditor General pointed out, the JRT reported out, and let me leave out Pierre Steyn, and as I'm trying to point out in an illustration here, and I do say this is an illustration. I could have perhaps compiled one of a number of other individuals to show that perhaps they bridged committee structures that is ill-advised. I don't go beyond that.
Thank you, Dr. Woods. Those are my questions. Thank you, Chair.
I suppose Albert Kane was the last person to cross-examine. Gentleman from...
Mr. Chair, I did indicate yesterday that I would consider cross-examination, but it seems that there would be no purpose to that now after the evidence given this morning.
Thank you. I suppose there's no other person who wants to cross-examine. Thank you. Advocate Mbang.
Thanks, Chair. That concludes the evidence of Dr. Woods. Chair, I must just mention that the next witness will be Dr. Crawford Brown, and we would then appreciate if the Commission could postpone his evidence to a date to be announced.
Thank you. First of all, maybe let me thank Dr. Woods for coming to the Commission and testifying. Oh, do you want to say something?
If I may, Chair, just as a concluding comment to thank you for this opportunity. I wish you'd given me more time to further strengthen my statement. I hope my statement is of some use to the Commission. But perhaps my biggest thank you through yourself, and I would imagine Advocate Ndumbi is the person who really deserves thanks, is for the 3 evidence leaders that were assigned to me. They've been an absolute pleasure to work with. They've taught me a lot. Their commitment, their hardworkingness, their professionalism, and also I think just the great human beings that they are. Thanks very much.
Thank you for the kind words, Dr. Woods. We must also thank you as a Commission for your assistance and for agreeing to come and give evidence. I hope what you have said to us today will help us to try and determine exactly what happened. And secondly, looking Parker, as I understand it, you're saying that the next witness is going to be Mr. Crawford Brown, but then you're still trying to arrange a date with him.
Thanks, Joe. We're trying to arrange date and also prepare his statement.
Thank you. So if we adjourn now, we are going to come back on a date to be arranged. We're unable to announce a date now.
Thanks, Joe. We are unable to give a certain date, and we'll appreciate if the date will be announced in the near future.
Thank you, Advocate Park. We'll now adjourn to a date to be announced. As soon as, there's an agreement between the evidence leaders and Mr. Crawford Brown about the date on which Mr. Crawford Brown will testify, we'll make a public announcement. Thank you. We'll adjourn now.